Hello everybody and welcome to this video on Tom Drives. This video is going to be about the Rover 75 and you may be asking, Tom, you've made about 1 million videos on this car. Well, what if I told you the Rover 75 didn't end production in 2005 when MG Rover collapsed? What if I told you it went on to be produced for 11 years in other countries under various different names? This video, of course, we're going to be covering the many extra lives of the Rover 75 in China and beyond. So let's get right into it. But first, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you get to see more of this, and let me know what you'd like to see next and what your opinions on all of this are, and if you have anything to add, because I really enjoy seeing and finding out all of this stuff, and it's been such an enjoyable experience to research all of this. But without further waffling, let's waffle about some cars. In 2002, China Brilliance and MG Rover were in talks regarding a promising joint venture to introduce the Rover 75 to the Chinese market, with the potential for China Brilliance to acquire the licensing to produce the 25 and 45 in China. The deal seemed fairly concrete, of course, with several Brilliance badge 75s being sent to China for evaluation and testing, with one even being unveiled at the booth of China Brilliance at a regional motor show in China. All of these cars were 2.5 litre KV6 units. Sadly, the deal collapsed in late 2002, and in early 2003, MG Rover tried to rescue the deal, but with no such luck. Of course, what happened to the cars? This is quite an interesting one. The 24 evaluation cars that were sent over later ended up appearing in China on car supermarkets and in various other unofficial means of selling cars that weren't, of course, linked to China Brilliance, badged as the, for lack of my ability to pronounce things on the screen, we'll just call it a Brilliance B8, with several being spotted being driven around with valid license plates and registrations. These cars, as far as we know, give and take a few coming on and off the road, are still in use all these years later. And that, of course, ends the Brilliance chapter with MG Rover. Now we move on to Roewe and the MG7, the two Chinese-produced Rover 75s and MG ZTs. During an incredibly turbulent few years, MG Rover executives worked tirelessly to find a partner in China. The China Brilliance deal amounted to nothing more than a business case for a promising deal in China. MG Rover, seeing the promise of China as an emerging market with a lot of cash-rich potential partners lacking in the skills and assets that MG Rover had, this produced the infamous SAIC MG Rover joint venture, which commenced talks in late 2003, with the plan being significant investment so MG Rover could develop and produce new models of MGs and Rovers being produced in China for the Chinese market, with SAIC owning 70% of MG Rover and MGR owning the other 30%. The Rover 75, of course, the crown jewel of MG Rover's assets, was of most interest to the Chinese team, and they were very happy initially with the engineering and design of the 75, with plans to collaborate on a reworking for the 2006 to 2007 model year, including new door pressings, new interiors, and the introduction of the powertrain developed G-Series diesel to replace the BMW co-developed M47R. As 2004 came to a close, the scale of the blunder was realised. MG Rover sold the family silver, essentially their main bargaining tool, their main asset, the intellectual property rights for the 25 series cars, including the ZR, and the 75 series cars, including the ZT, with the K-series engine for £67 million, which of course was far less than the £1 billion plus figure that John Towers had been touting to the press in late 2004. The tooling specifications, the container dimensions, all of the production information and rights were sold for less than 10% of the figure, supposedly. This, of course, was part of the first investment, apparently, and more money was to come. Of course, as we know, that didn't happen. So their main bargaining chip, which is essentially I would say 70% of the worth in intellectual property rights of MG Rover was sold for less than 10%. We'll just let that sink in for a second. In 2005, as we know, SAIC walked away from the deal with MG Rover, resulting in MG Rover's collapse a month later. SAIC, of course, went on to supposedly produce the new Rover range. However, there was a bit of a spanner in the works in the forms of another Chinese car giant. During the administration of MG Rover, another Chinese car giant jumped into the fray, NAC. Therefore, SAIC lost the bulk of the assets it planned to purchase in its sort of budget, otherworldly acquisition of MG Rover to its main rival, to throw, of course, a massive spanner in the works of its plans. But then BMW, as it always does, came along and decided to be the hero in this case. And if you didn't know, BMW actually licensed the Rover name to MG Rover. BMW then sold the name to Ford in October of 2006, putting the brakes on the Chinese new Rover plan. But then, of course, like a brand out of Wish, like the weirdest thing you've ever seen, Roewe emerged from the ashes of MG Rover with all of the unfortunate British stereotypes and British isms which happen to do quite well on the Chinese market. What of NAC, of course? With its purchase of MG Rover's remaining assets, they shipped the tooling for the 75 and ZT to China, and in March of 2007 started production of the MG7, which contained several improvements, but was actually quite close to the original form of the Rover 75, including a lot of features removed by Project Drive. And if you'd like me to make a video on Project Drive, let me know in the comments, because I'd love to do that. Things like bonnet insulation, driver's side grab handles, and more. The MG7 had two main models and two trim levels. The MG7L, which is essentially a long wheelbase 75 with a premium grille, and the standard MG7, which is the original wheelbase size of the MG-ZT and 75 in Europe. These trim levels were Classic, which had a slatted grille similar to a 75, and Sport, which had the mesh style grille similar to a ZT in Europe. The MG7 was produced until 2013 and was largely unchanged during its production run. SAIC were in development just before the collapse of MG Rover on a Rover 75 for the Chinese market. Of course, with the legal issues mentioned previously, that later became the Roewe 750, which was launched in October 2006. The car had a number of changes, including the 103mm longer wheelbase, the new K-Series engine known as the Cavici engine. The interior was also heavily revised, looking like a taxi out of Grand Theft Auto, a restyled rear end, and of course the inclusion of the premium grille on the 750E and 750. The 750 had three trim levels, the 750D, the 750E and the 750i. The 750D can include either the 1.8 K-Series or the 2.5 litre with 16-inch wheels, whereas the 750E and the 750i are V6 only with 18-inch wheels as standard. The top-end 750i added GPS, television and DVD, and a few other random comforts. In 2007, the car was revised once again, unveiling in Beijing of that year a hybrid version with a similar concept to the Toyota Prius, mating a 4-cylinder petrol engine to an electric motor with some batteries in the boot. In 2012, the car was revised for the final time, with new headlights finally ditching the original headlights introduced by MG Rover in the 2004 facelift of the Rover 75. However, time had not been kind on this faux Rover, and the age of the design was starting to show. The 750 sat awkwardly in the middle of its stablemates, the Roewe 550 and 950. Due to this and many other factors, the Roewe 750's production run ended on the 9th of November 2016, ending a 10-year production run long after MG Rovers' collapse under SAIC, and closing the final ill-fated chapter on one of the most important cars ever made in British history, the Rover 75. However, this is not the end of the Rover 75, as it lives on, of course, through enthusiasts, both in Europe and in China. I found a significant number of videos on the Roewe 750 and MG7 on the Chinese YouTube, which is called this, suggesting it has quite a following over there as well. There's extensive modification videos, there's a dude retrimming all of his interior. There's just general videos of these guys modifying these cars and just enjoying them as standard, and I think it is really, really fantastic. In addition, of course, the Rover 75's following in the UK has to be one of the most energising I've ever experienced in terms of a car community, with thousands of people, quite frankly, obsessed with this car, me included. And while the final chapter of its production was ill-fated and quite sad, the Rover 75 and its counterparts have gone on to inspire and enrich our Rover car communities in the UK and others all over the world. So this is the bit where I give my opinion, as I did in the last two videos. So with this, believe it or not, it's said that the Roewe 750 in its form in 2006 would have been the Rover 75 facelift or refresh that we would have seen in 2006 and 2007, which is quite sad. Because it looks absolutely terrible, in my honest opinion. Not necessarily everything about it, I just don't like the rear end. I think the rear end is it's one of those that you can pin on a certain time period, and I don't know, it's quite Americanized, to be honest with you. Of course, if you think about it, I don't really think anybody would have really bought it, to be honest with you, other than out of pride. But the Rover 75, of course, as we know, is a brilliant car, so maybe that's a bit of a silly assumption to make. I think, though, in my head, if I was in China, I would probably not buy one slightly out of principle, because it was essentially like a zombie acquisition. They were trying to wait for MG Rover to die, and all those people, with families losing their jobs, and the lost heritage and loss of mass manufacturing and ownership of a mass manufactured car company in the UK to essentially get some assets. But as is business and as is life, I'm afraid, that doesn't obviously separate from the thousands and thousands of people that lost their jobs and livelihoods, and the communities that were devastated, and all of that just for business is just incredibly grotesque to me. As for the Roewe 750 though, it does look like a Rover 75 from Wish.com. It looks like a bit of a knockoff, to be honest with you. And that's about it, really. There isn't really much more of an opinion you can have on it, because it is a bit... The Rover 75, it isn't out of its depth even now, with various improvements. For example, my car is sort of being modernised a bit with a new sat-nav and stuff, and I don't think it's out of place in a modern car park, and I don't think it's out of place as a modern driver as well as a daily, or as a classic. It's a very versatile car depending on which model you get. However, as a new car, it doesn't really cut the mustard without any improvements, and that's essentially what this is. This is a repackaged crap version of it, and I really don't like the idea of that. The final design's headlights were absolutely grotesque. It looked like something out of a Hemswell Market car boot sale that someone's whacked on. It just looks terrible. The premium grille looks nice, but the bottom of the bottom left and right flank, I don't really like that. And that's it. It's really the Britishisms and the faux heritage and that sort of stuff. And you'll see it in a lot of the adverts that I've shown throughout this video. There's an advert where they visit, like a palace. It's just a bit ridiculous to me. That if that's not weird cultural fetishism, then I don't know what is. But here we are. Let's not get too political. Anyway, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know what you want next. Thank you for watching. Project videos to return next week, and I will see you again soon. Keep watching, and I will speak to you again. Thank you.